They thought darkness would hide them. They were wrong. I am Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and I'm here to tell you what they buried in classified files, what they swore would never reach African ears, what they believed we'd never have the courage to expose. The CIA and Mossad didn't just underestimate me. They underestimated an entire continent that's done being their chessboard. This isn't theory. This isn't speculation. This is what happened when two of the world's most powerful intelligence agencies discovered that Africa has learned to fight back. Listen carefully to what I'm about to say. For 70 years, foreign intelligence networks operated across Africa like they owned it, like our land was their laboratory, like our sovereignty was a suggestion they could ignore whenever convenient. They moved in shadows, recruited our officials, monitored our communications, influenced our policies, toppled leaders who refused to cooperate, and we were supposed to accept it, smile, shake hands, pretend we didn't notice the strings attached to our own governments. But something changed. I changed it. When I took power in Burkina Faso, I made a decision that terrified Washington and Tel Aviv. I decided that independence wasn't just a word we inherited from our grandfathers who fought colonialism. Independence is something you enforce every single day, with intelligence, with strategy, with the willingness to say no to the most powerful nations on earth. They didn't believe I was serious. They thought I was another young African leader who'd make noise for a few months, then quietly fall in line. Take the Yenju. Accept the advisors. Look the other way when their operatives showed up at our borders. I proved them catastrophically wrong. Let me tell you what I discovered when I started investigating foreign presence in my country. We didn't just find a few scattered spies. We found an empire. CIA operatives embedded in economic institutions that controlled our trade policies. Mossad assets positioned in telecommunications companies monitoring every call, every message, every digital footprint. Networks so deep, they'd spent decades building relationships, buying influence, creating dependencies. They had people in our defense ministry, our foreign affairs department, our natural resources division. They knew our military movements before some of our own generals did. They influenced investment decisions that affected millions of Burkinabe citizens. This wasn't espionage. This was occupation by another name. And when I identified them, when I mapped their entire operation, when I prepared to dismantle everything they'd built, that's when they decided I had to be eliminated. Not arrested, not discredited, eliminated. Because removing their networks from Burkina Faso wasn't just about my country, it was about setting a precedent. If one African nation could successfully identify and expel these intelligence operations, others might follow. If Burkina Faso could operate independently, without accommodating Western intelligence services, it proved something they couldn't allow to be proven, that Africa doesn't need them anymore. They tried to kill me 3 times. 3 times. Let that sink in for a moment. The CIA and Mossad, with all their technology, all their experience, all their resources, spanning decades of successful operations across every continent, they tried to eliminate one African president 3 times. And 3 times, they failed. The first attempt was poison, sophisticated, nearly undetectable, the kind of substance that mimics natural illness, that degrades in the body before autopsies can identify it. They'd used it successfully in operations across the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and yes, in Africa. But we had prepared for this. My security protocols weren't designed by foreign consultants who reported back to their handlers. They were designed by Burkinabe officers who understood that protecting sovereignty means trusting no one outside your circle of verified loyalty. Every meal tested, every route varied, every pattern broken. They failed. The second attempt was explosives, a convoy ambush designed to look like local insurgency. They had mapped the routes, positioned the devices, coordinated the timing with precision that showed their trademark operational planning. But we had changed the game. My movements aren't predictable. My security doesn't follow standard patterns. My intelligence network had detected their surveillance weeks before they moved. When they triggered those explosives, they destroyed empty vehicles on a decoy route while I was 50 kilometers away, receiving reports of their failure. They failed again. The third attempt was direct assassination, operatives on the ground, close-range elimination. the method they use when subtlety has failed and they need results regardless of exposure risk. But we were waiting. My special forces didn't just react. They anticipated, they tracked, they positioned. And when those operatives made their move, they found themselves surrounded by soldiers who'd trained for exactly this scenario, who'd studied exactly these techniques, who knew exactly how these operations unfold. They failed completely. Now here's what they didn't expect. We didn't just survive their assassination attempts. We captured their operatives. We intercepted their communications. We seized their equipment. We documented everything. I'm holding evidence right now that proves coordination between CIA handlers and Mossad field agents. Communications that show how they shared intelligence on Burkina Faso. Planning documents that detail their operational timeline. Technical equipment that reveals surveillance capabilities they've deployed across multiple African nations. This isn't speculation. This is documented proof of foreign intelligence operations designed to eliminate an African head of state because he refused to surrender his nation's sovereignty. And they want you to believe this never happened. They want you to think I'm making this up, that I'm paranoid, that I'm inventing threats to consolidate power or distract from domestic issues. But I have their operatives in custody, singing like birds, confirming everything, providing details about networks that span across West Africa, identifying other assets still operating in neighboring countries, revealing the full scope of operations that most African leaders don't even know are running in their own nations. The truth is simpler and more terrifying than any conspiracy theory. For decades, Africa wasn't truly independent. We had flags, we had national anthems, we had seats at the United Nations, but we didn't have sovereignty. Not real sovereignty. Not until some of us decided to take it back. Let me tell you why this matters beyond Burkina Faso. When I expelled those intelligence networks, I didn't just protect my country, I exposed their entire African operation, because these networks don't operate in isolation. They're connected, coordinated, part of a continental strategy that treats Africa as a single theater of control. What we found in Burkina Faso exists in other nations. Intelligence operatives with diplomatic cover, operating freely across capitals, economic advisors who report back to foreign agencies, security consultants who monitor African military capabilities, aid workers who gather intelligence under humanitarian cover. And it's not just CIA and Mossad. Every major power has networks here. Everyone wants their piece of African resources, African markets, African strategic positioning, and they've learned that direct colonialism doesn't work anymore. So they created something more sophisticated, intelligence networks that influence without governing, control without visibility, dominance without accountability. Until now. Because what I've done in Burkina Faso proves it can be dismantled. It shows that African nations have the capability to detect these operations, the courage to confront them, the strength to survive the consequences. And that's the real threat to their system. Not one African leader who refuses to cooperate, but the example that might inspire others. Something is happening across Africa that they didn't anticipate. A generation of leaders is emerging who didn't inherit independence, who didn't watch colonialism end from history books, who grew up seeing how supposed independence came with invisible chains, who understand that true sovereignty isn't granted, it's taken. We're watching each other, learning from each other, supporting each other in ways that don't make headlines but matter profoundly. When Burkina Faso expelled foreign intelligence networks, other African nations paid attention. When I survived assassination attempts, others studied how. When we demonstrated that it's possible to operate independently, others started questioning their own dependencies. This isn't coordinated rebellion. It's awakening. And it's spreading faster than they can contain it. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, nations that are rejecting foreign military bases, questioning economic agreements that extract more than they provide, demanding actual partnership instead of disguised exploitation. They call it instability. We call it liberation. They call it dangerous nationalism. We call it sovereignty. They call it threat to regional security. We call it Africa making its own decisions for the first time in generations. Here's what they really didn't expect. We learned. Every technique they used against us, we studied. Every operational pattern, we documented. Every technological advantage, we found ways to counter. They thought African intelligence services were decades behind, that we lacked training, lacked resources, lacked sophistication. They were right, until recently. But we closed that gap faster than they calculated was possible, because we had one advantage they didn't account for: motivation. The burning desire to protect our people from foreign manipulation, the determination to end the cycle where external powers decide African fates. We trained specialists, not in Western academies where they'd be recruited or compromised, but in our own facilities, by our own officers, using our own methods adapted to our own realities. We built detection systems, not expensive Western technology we'd have to purchase and maintain with foreign support, but practical systems that work in African conditions, powered by African innovation. We created counterintelligence capabilities, not by copying foreign models, but by understanding our own vulnerabilities and designing defenses specifically for them. And it worked. When Mossad came with night vision equipment, we were waiting with patience. When CIA came with satellite surveillance, we moved with unpredictability. When they came with decades of experience, we met them with something they couldn't train for: the fury of a people who refuse to be controlled anymore. I won't lie to you. This path has costs. When you refuse to cooperate with foreign intelligence agencies, aid gets complicated, investment gets questioned, international relationships get strained. Pressure comes from directions you didn't anticipate. They have ways of making independence expensive. Economic sanctions disguised as policy concerns. Investment restrictions framed as risk assessment. Diplomatic isolation presented as regional security considerations. But here's what I've learned. Sovereignty is always expensive. The only question is who pays the price. Do our children pay by growing up in nations controlled by foreign powers? Do our grandchildren pay by inheriting dependencies we were too afraid to break? Do future generations pay by watching their resources extracted, their policies dictated, their destinies decided in capitals thousands of kilometers away? Or do we pay now? By accepting difficulty, by enduring pressure, by surviving assassination attempts and diplomatic isolation and economic challenges. I chose the second option because temporary hardship is better than permanent subjugation. Because dignity has value that can't be measured in GDP. Because I'd rather die fighting for Burkina Faso's independence than live comfortably as a puppet who takes orders from Washington or Paris or Tel Aviv. My message to every African leader listening to this is simple. You have a choice. You can continue pretending you don't see the foreign intelligence operatives in your capitals. You can keep accepting their presence as inevitable. You can maintain the comfortable fiction that the advisors surrounding you aren't reporting back to their handlers. Or you can do what Burkina Faso did. Investigate, identify, dismantle. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, there will be consequences. Yes, they might try to eliminate you like they tried to eliminate me. But what's the alternative? Spending your entire presidency implementing policies designed in foreign capitals? Making decisions based on what external powers will accept? Leaving your successor the same compromised sovereignty you inherited? I'm not asking you to follow me. I'm asking you to follow your conscience. Africa doesn't need more leaders who are good at taking orders. We need leaders who are willing to give them, who understand that independence without sovereignty is just theater, who recognize that our nations will never develop fully while foreign powers maintain veto authority over our decisions. The intelligence networks I dismantled in Burkina Faso exist in your countries too. The question is whether you're willing to find them. This isn't just about Africa. What's happening here has implications for every nation, every region, every people who've experienced foreign manipulation. Because for too long, the world operated on the assumption that certain nations had the right to intervene anywhere, to gather intelligence anywhere, to influence politics anywhere, to eliminate threats anywhere. All justified by sophisticated arguments about security, stability, counterterrorism, promoting democracy. But who gave them that authority? Who decided that American security requires intelligence operations in Burkina Faso? Who determined that Israeli interests justify espionage networks across Africa? Who established that Western stability depends on maintaining control over African resources? They gave themselves that authority through military power, economic dominance, technological advantage. the ability to act without accountability because no one was strong enough to stop them. Until some of us decided to try. Burkina Faso is small. We're not a superpower. We don't have advanced weapon systems or massive budgets or global military reach. But we have something they can't defeat with technology. We have the refusal to accept that our size determines our rights, that our poverty justifies their intrusion, that our history of colonialism means we're permanently vulnerable to new forms of control. And when we demonstrate that even small nations can resist, it creates possibilities everywhere. Let me tell you what keeps them awake at night. It's not Burkina Faso becoming a regional power. It's not me personally. It's not any single nation or leader. What terrifies them is the example spreading. Imagine in Africa, where every nation operates the way Burkina Faso does now, where intelligence networks can't function because local security identifies them immediately, where economic agreements get negotiated based on African interests instead of foreign demands, where military partnerships happen on equal terms or don't happen at all. Imagine an Africa that doesn't need their permission to make decisions, that doesn't accept their interference as inevitable, that treats sovereignty as something real instead of ceremonial. That's the future they're desperately trying to prevent. Because it doesn't just affect Africa. If African nations can successfully resist foreign intelligence operations, what stops Latin American nations from doing the same? What prevents Asian countries from questioning similar arrangements? What keeps European nations from reconsidering their relationship with American intelligence services? The entire system of global intelligence dominance depends on the assumption that it's inevitable, that resisting is impossible, that small nations trying to protect their sovereignty will always fail. I'm proving that assumption wrong. And every day I survive, every month Burkina Faso operates independently, every year we maintain genuine sovereignty, that proof gets stronger. So here's my message to the CIA and Mossad. You failed. You came with your decades of experience, your advanced technology, your sophisticated methods, your confidence that no African nation could detect or counter your operations. And you failed. Not because you made mistakes, not because you got unlucky, but because you fundamentally misunderstood what you were dealing with. You thought you were dealing with another African leader who'd make noise, then comply. Another government you could manipulate through pressure and incentives. Another nation you could control through intelligence networks. You were dealing with something different. A people who've had enough. A military that serves their nation instead of foreign interests. A leader who'd rather die than surrender sovereignty. You can't defeat that with technology. You can't buy it with aid. You can't eliminate it with assassination. Because it's not about me. I'm just the one saying it out loud. The refusal to be controlled anymore. That's in every Burkinabe heart. That's spreading across Africa. That's the future you can't stop, no matter how many operations you run. They came in darkness, believing we were blind. But we've been watching, learning, preparing. They came with weapons, thinking we were weak. But we've been training, organizing, building strength they didn't anticipate. They came with plans, assuming we were predictable. But we've been thinking, adapting, creating strategies they can't counter with their playbooks. I am Captain Ibrahim Traoré. I am the president of Burkina Faso. I am alive, still breathing, still commanding, still fighting. And every day I wake up is another day their plan failed, another day Africa grows stronger, another day sovereignty becomes more real. They wanted me silent. I'm louder than ever. They wanted me gone. I'm going nowhere. They wanted Burkina Faso back under control. We're more independent than we've ever been. This is the new Africa they didn't expect. The Africa that fights back. The Africa that protects its own. The Africa that refuses to ask permission to exist freely. And no matter how many operations they run, how many networks they build, how many assassination attempts they plan, they will never defeat a people who've decided they're done being conquered. Welcome to the future. It doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to us.